Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here after MSU's game against the Indiana Hoosiers, where Michigan State lost 67 to 71. Little apology for the delay in the recording, but it was really late night and life slash work got in the way. Big thanks to all of you who support the show via one-time gifts, payments on Venmo or PayPal, or on a recurring basis on Patreon, Substack, or YouTube. You can find ways to do that at our support page at thefinalfour.com/support. Well, Rod, where to begin with this game? I have to admit, I wasn't real worried going to this game, coming in, and then as the game was going, it was pretty much going the way I expected. Michigan State got up to a pretty big 12-point lead. Indiana was having trouble. They tried some threes. They weren't able to do much on offense or defense very well. And then that lead became a 3-point deficit at halftime. It's a Spartan offense, but sort of midway through the first half, just totally got stuck in the mud, basically with Indiana's zone. And Indiana, although we talked before, doesn't play slow. They really slowed the game down. They played not only the zone, but they really were milking the clock in every possession pretty much. And just were punishing things, Michigan State down low with pick and roll action with Ballo and Renew and isolating the lane and forced, even didn't even get opportunity for people to dig down because they had their shooter usually outside, like Goody. And so this isn't the first time Michigan State's seen a zone. I think they've generally struggled against the zone, which in the past I don't feel like they've done that so much. But USC, they had a lot of trouble. And I think it's fair to say at this point in the season, we're almost done with the season. There's 7 games left in the regular season. The shooting's just not very good. And the ability to shoot over the zone is obviously a problem. And the way to break down the zone, obviously, is you get inside and then either turn around or kick out to someone. Well, even the guys turning around, no one feels comfortable turning around and hitting a 10-footer. And so they were missing all those, the ones they attempted. The guards weren't really able to get in the lane, attack the rim. And so, offensively, I don't think anybody was very good. There's bad point guard play, bad wing play, bad interior play. I mean, the only thing they could do was shoot free throws or 21-25. That was somewhat inflated by just the nature of how the game ended with kind of a free throw contest. And Indiana, to their credit, hit enough at the end to win the game. I thought this was a game where Woodson, to his credit, I thought had a really good coaching plan, had good execution, and the team, once they figured out that Michigan State couldn't do anything with the zone, they just stuck to it and really took Michigan State out of their game. It was a really super frustrating game. I can only imagine what it's like for the players because that can't be what they were expecting. And now, looking ahead to this rest of the schedule, I mean, we were talking this was the easiest game on their schedule going forward. You got road games at Illinois, Michigan, Maryland, Iowa to some extent, but then your home games are not cakewalks either. You got Michigan, Wisconsin, and Purdue. So no cupcakes left.
Yeah, it was an awful, ugly game to watch, and I'll give Mike Woodson some credit, not a lot. Um, Defensively, look, it doesn't take much to say, okay, we're going to stick with the zone because you're not attacking it well.
Right.
But that's on Michigan State. That was, and I'm not talking about the 3-point shooting. The thing that frustrated me to no end is how passive and slow the ball movement was in this game. The way you beat a zone is you get the ball into the gaps. Simply put, I mean, you can complicate it from there, but that's the basics. You get the ball into the gaps, which in this case is that free throw. It was basically a 2-3 that they
Yeah.
were playing, I think. And you get the ball into that free throw line extended area. Michigan State could not do that with any regularity. I'm going to disagree with one thing you said. They actually did find some opportunities that they converted in the second half by getting the ball into the gap. Frankie Fiddler hit a couple
Yeah,
from
but he
there.
even was hesitant a couple times too when he got in.
Yeah,
He looked kind of lost.
it looked awkward.
Yeah.
I won't disagree with that, but they did have some conversions. But I guess my point is those possessions were examples of what you have to do. They struggled all game long getting it into that gap, and I would submit that the primary culprit was how slow and how passive their ball movement was on the perimeter. You have to swing that thing with pace. You have to force that defense to move
Hmm.
side to side, and when you do that, eventually opportunities are going to present themselves, either for dribble penetration into the gap or passing into the gap. If you can't do that with regularity, you are not going to get good shots because you won't force that zone to distort. You won't force their big men to have to step up. You won't force the guards to have to react to it. And Michigan State didn't do that with any regularity at all. So if you want to look to why they struggled offensively, it starts there. And I would say it ends there too,
Yeah.
because the 3-point shooting, look, I think you're right. It's at this point, I'll back up half a step. Am I still convinced that they have enough good shooters objectively, like in a vacuum, guys that I believe are capable of hitting jumpers on this team to be successful? Yes. But the numbers are what they are.
Yep.
And we've talked about this before. Normally, you see a correlation between good free throw shooting and good 3-point shooting. And Michigan State is an outstanding free throw shooting team. Outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that their 3-point shooting is where it is defies logic. It really does. But that doesn't change. It's like they say about financial markets, right? They can stay irrational longer than your pocketbook stays flush. That's how I would describe Michigan State's 3-point shooting. But that's kind of the point. When you see that threes, and they mostly shot what were, you could argue with the rhythmic nature of them, but most of those threes they took were open.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Once they're not falling, you can't just keep doing it. You've got to attack the zone. You've got to find ways to get the ball into those gaps. And they just did not do it. And as I say, I think I know why. It's because they didn't move the ball well enough, not nearly well enough. They let Indiana have their way with that and didn't do the things you need to do to combat that kind of approach. Because I'm going to tell you flat out, that's a half-ass zone. That's a they were saying on the broad, you wouldn't have heard this, but on the
No.
broadcast, they were talking about how they'd spoken to Woodson about it, and Woodson had said, I really don't like playing it, but sometimes we have to. Well, what does that tell you? He doesn't believe in it, but he believed in it last night because it was working.
Yeah.
And it completely changed the pace of the game, all of it. It took Michigan State completely out of the way that they want to play. And so you end up with a result along the lines of what we got. Defensively, I'll give credit to them for recognizing that Michigan State was not going to double, which is not a surprise. Historically, Tom Izzo been very reluctant to double. He had kind of changed that up the last couple of years where we saw it with more frequency, but we didn't see it pretty much at all yesterday. And you correctly identified part of the problem, especially I thought in the second half.
Yes.
Indiana did a really good job late in that game, too, of isolating. It would be either Renault or Ballo on the block, and they'd have Goody, who is their one truly reliable 3-point shooter, making the post entry. So that made it difficult for the guy guarding Goody to dig down and disrupt the post players. Smart. You maybe got at that point, maybe you got to think about, all right, we send a second defender from elsewhere rather than digging down. You know, there are adjustments that you could theoretically make. Michigan State really didn't make those. But even so, I'm going to say 71 points given up in a game that was inflated or added to by late fouling and free throws. Michigan State's defense was not the major problem, in my opinion. And normally I'm willing to say, hey, it kind of started and ended here on the defensive end. I don't think so last night. I think it was the offensive end. And one other thing, going back to offense, I do not understand when you're facing a zone like that, how it's even possible that you are not getting more offensive rebounding opportunities than they got. There was some weird stuff. Like I remember one shot, it came fairly late in the game. Shot went up from the perimeter, it was missed. And Zapala is right there. He's the only guy there. All he's got to do is go get it. And he didn't react. He just stood there for a half beat. And a half beat is long enough to allow somebody else to get to the ball. I was
Yeah.
stunned. it's stuff, and I'm not meaning to pick on him. He plays hard. I've got no problem with him overall, but in that game, he was emblematic of the issue. They were just a day late and a dollar short in terms of the pace they played with in the half court and their reaction time. Indiana was quicker to the ball. That shouldn't ever happen. And, and
Yeah.
especially half-ass team with a coach who's heading out the door. They basically, I mean, theoretically, they could still make the tournament, but there's not a lot at stake for that group. And you let that team outwork you, play harder than you do. Come on.
Yeah.
That was just it's the USC game was frustrating. This was worse. This was way worse
I agree.
to
Yeah. It was at home
watch.
for one thing. And it was a
Well,
team against a team that sort of
yeah,
has given up, right, for the year, sort of.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'll give Indiana credit. Did Indiana play with a little more purpose, a little more fire than they have been? Yeah, maybe. But it shouldn't matter.
No.
The reason you said that you weren't worried about it, and honestly, neither was I, is I looked at it. I was on Jack Evelyn's show. I'm like, I can't imagine Indiana's going to gear up for this game, and Michigan State's got everything in the world to play for. Like, there's just no reason for that. So I would imagine it's Breslin Center or the Berkowitz is an unpleasant place to be today, and rightly so,
Yeah.
because they just, maybe a handful of guys. I was pretty happy with the way Carson Cooper competed.
Yep. He's
Um,
maybe it for me. Fiddler, I thought, did
I
pretty
thought
well.
he tried to play hard. I thought Jace tried tried to do things. He was the guy who was most attack minded. That's why he led them in scoring.
Hmm.
But other than that, man, not good. Not a good
Yeah.
showing.
Well, and Jace was, I mean, there's clearly an emphasis, some sort of focus, I guess, in getting him more shots. And he was bad early. I mean, I don't, I mean, he was missing shots
Well,
from
he
three and
just missed
he was kind of
he
forcing a
missed
little bit more.
shots.
You know, I think he
Yeah,
was, I felt
I'd
like for
agree
the
with
first time
that.
he was
I'd agree with
forcing,
that. I'd
where
agree
in the
with that.
past, it sort of came in the flow and he's
Yep.
been much more efficient.
And note, what does that do to your efficiency? I've heard people say this, and
Just need more shots. Yeah.
Even Tom Izzo has said, you know, I would like him to be more aggressive in looking for his own shot. Um, but I just had this discussion on the Spartan Mag board. It's easy to say, well, he's got to play more minutes, get him more shots. Yeah, but you're probably going to be sacrificing something there. The reason that he's as efficient as he is because he's very selective and he
Right.
takes shots that he knows he can make. And he was still their most productive player. So I can only go after him so much. I mean, I think he actually competed at something remotely close to the level necessary, whereas I can't say that about many other guys. It was just, yeah, that was just this ugly game to watch.
Yeah.
Really disappointing.
I feel like, there are two things. One is it did feel like a tournament game in the sense that sometimes you'll have a team run into someone who plays, totally changes the pace of play and takes you
Yeah.
completely out of your game. And now that is partly that to Indiana's credit, but I think it's more Michigan State sort of allowing the game to be played at a slow pace and to just sort of fall into that funk of just, okay, now we got to attack the zone versus trying to beat them down the court. And, maybe that was a little bit Indiana's transition defense, I suppose, but
No,
they
that's
sort
what
of
I'm
made the game
saying.
that way. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm irritated by it.
Yeah.
Is I look at it and think, okay, Indiana played a zone, big deal. That's not a real strategic revelation. You know, it's on Michigan State to not react to it. And again, I'm not talking about missed threes. I'm talking about why are you not moving the ball the way you need to? Why are you not getting the ball into the gaps? Why are you not attacking the offensive glass? It was just passivity from
Yes.
top to bottom.
It, aside from the first 5 to 6 minutes of the game, I suppose, where they came out and looked
No,
pretty
that was
good.
great. But Indiana wasn't playing zone.
Right. No, I mean, I was just going to say, besides those few minutes, the rest of the game felt like just kind of rolling the ball out, kind of effort
Yep.
out there for the team.
Yep.
And, maybe not that you ever want that sort of, but, clearly they're not a team that you can just roll the ball out and beat a team like Indiana.
Absolutely beat anybody.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
This,
So,
this team has had success this year based as much as anything else on their effort and their energy.
mhm.
That is who they are. They are not a bunch of, a collection of, 5 or 6 future pros who can just kind of roll the ball out there. They're not Indiana. That's who
Right.
Indiana is. Indiana occasionally, not that I think they got 5 or 6 pros either, but Indiana occasionally can have success just based on their quote unquote talent, like they did last night.
Hmm.
But they don't win consistently because they don't play with effort and energy. You know, that's
Yeah.
Michigan State's calling card. And to see them not do that, very disappointing.
Yeah. Well, and this is now 3 or 4 losses in the last four
Yeah.
games. Of course, 2 on the road in LA, whatever you can check that out. But
Yeah.
again,
Well,
it's not
if
getting
I
easier.
if I'm counting over the last 8 halves of basketball that they've played two that were good. Second half of both the UCLA and Oregon games, I thought were good to very good halves of basketball. Other than that, neither half against USC. I think the first half against UCLA was substandard. First
Hmm.
half against Oregon clearly was substandard, and both halves last night. That's not good.
No.
And you're going into tough situations. You're going into Champaign. You're going to come home on Tuesday then to host Purdue. You better figure it out. You better
Yeah.
ratchet it up. Now, the good news is they're fully capable of doing what needs to be done. But this was a giveaway. When you're talking about Big Ten title contention, now you're in a situation where you got to make this up.
Yep.
So what that means is you got to figure out a way, get a win at Illinois, at Michigan, at Maryland. One of those three. Because I
Right.
expect they will win at Iowa. They need to win. If you can't win that, you have no business talking about contending in the Big Ten anyway. But it's
Right.
put you for the first time this season, it's put you a little bit behind the 8 ball, where now
And
you're in
obviously
makeup.
you got to win at home too with those
Oh, you
games
got to
against
hold that
Wisconsin,
goes
Purdue,
without
and Michigan. Right. I mean, that's
goes
kind of
without
obvious.
saying. Goes
Yeah.
without saying. Got to sweep those. If we're talking about Big Ten title contention and being a top 3, top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, that's the
Hmm.
standard we're talking about.
So I guess the question is, well, before we talk about broader picture, so let's talk about the game too. With as far as point guard play from Fears, he
Ooh,
didn't play. He didn't play, but he was rough. Trey
yeah,
was a little better.
just
Jace,
eh,
but I mean,
not much,
I
not
say just a
much.
little. I would
Yeah,
say he was a little less passive. But what's going on with Jeremy? I mean, I feel like I don't know, the last few games he has not been. I mean, obviously missed the game with Indiana or with
with
Oregon,
Oregon. Yeah,
but the 2 games in LA, and I do not feel like the pace is the attacking sort of nature of his game is the same. And I don't. Now it could be just be that the scouting is out, and they know what to do to stop him. And you could almost say the same thing to Carr, who also has been sort of like a no show the last few games as well, at least from an offensive standpoint. I mean, what do you think is going on? We'll start with Jeremy, I guess.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I know it's not
But
it's not
it's
meant to
not me
be.
imagining it, right? I
But
mean, this is real.
he hasn't been playing well. No, not by the standard he had set earlier. For most of the season. Yeah, that's true. But this is his first full year of play,
Hmm.
and it happens. And so it doesn't have me worried about, any long-term implications of Jeremy Fears. It's just right now they got to get him back to playing as aggressively and assertively as he had been. That much is clear. But yeah, he had a really bad night. I would agree Trey was better, but Trey wasn't good enough either. Neither was Jaden. I mean, as I say, the only guy who I think even came close to a passing mark among those guards was Jace, and it wasn't his best game
No.
by any means. But yeah, it starts at the point, right? And ultimately, I put the primary responsibility for the way they didn't attack that zone on the back of the point guard, because that's your quarterback, that's your guy who's supposed to lead the charge, and Michigan State's point guards did not do that.
Do you think part of the problem too, especially the zone, because this is for 100% certainty, they are going to be facing a lot more zone going forward until they prove that they can
Sure,
break this, right? I mean, I
sure,
would if I was
sure,
going up against them
sure.
because you're not worried about the shooting really outside shooting, and you're, Is there someone who do you think it will be comfortable sitting in that free throw line to break it down? Like I
Yeah,
would,
multiple guys. I
right,
mean,
but
we've
we have not
seen
seen
it.
it much this
No,
game.
we
Is
have seen it. I'm going to disagree with that.
okay,
We
great.
have seen it. They did it against Oregon. Oregon was playing a bunch of zone. What
It's true.
happened in that game? Okay. Um, they've attacked the zone. Yeah, Frankie Fiddler can handle that role. I would argue Jackson Kohler can handle that role. You could always put when you're playing a 3 guard lineup, you can always put one of the guards in that
Right.
role.
And that's what they did
They're
against Oregon. Yeah.
Booker's done it. They've got guys who in theory should be able to handle it. I'm going to tell you that the primary problem last night was not that they didn't have somebody in that role who could handle it. It's that that guy never got the ball. They didn't get it in there enough to make it matter. I mean, seriously, go back. If you have the stomach for it, go back and watch. See how much time was just spent just aimlessly circling the ball left to right and back to left on the perimeter and never going vertically, never moving vertically. Why did that happen? Primarily, it happened because the ball moved slowly enough that Indiana never lost its shape. And so, because they've got some decent length on the perimeter, those guys were able to pretty easily deny easy angles for that pass to be made. And they were also in position that you couldn't go through them via the dribble
Hmm.
into the gaps.
Yeah.
So consequently, the ball never got in the gaps. It was rare. It was a very rare thing when the ball got into the gaps in that game. So if you can't do that, you're not going to beat a zone. Or what's going to happen is you're going to be reduced to hoisting up threes. And we know
Yeah.
that's not a strength.
Right. It that game felt exactly like the Syracuse game in the NCAA tournament a number of years ago. Where
Yeah,
and then you get that pace,
similar.
and then then you just can't hit a shot, and then when you are open, even you have a good, it's out of rhythm or whatever, and
Yeah.
they short arming everything. It
Yep.
was
Yeah.
well, we don't need to dwell on that anymore. So let's
Well, the nice thing is the diagnosis of that game is a pretty simple one because I think that's where it is. You can talk about the defensive end, and again, the fact that both of Indiana's low post players were able to have very, very productive nights. And that's true. And there could have been, maybe in retrospect, I think maybe Izzo would have thought about a little bit of a different approach in terms of maybe bringing occasional doubles, not just relying on dig downs, because Indiana set that up well enough that you were going to have difficulty doing that because what it would have meant is Luke Goody and to a lesser extent Rice would have had open 3 looks, and you don't want
mhm.
to do that. They're good enough shooters that you don't want to do that. But again, I look at it and I say Indiana didn't exactly burn the nets up in terms of offensive
No.
efficiency, and they scored 71 goddamn points. They didn't. That game was not lost defensively.
Yeah, it's funny if you actually looked at the numbers, and we'll go over them a little later. You'd almost come away thinking that they probably did okay. I mean, there's some that are glaring, but a lot of them are like, oh, it's not like Indiana, like you said, it's not like Indiana was some sort of offensive juggernaut. I mean, maybe in the second
No.
half more, they were shot 65%. That's because they're a little more judicious in what they're doing. All right. So let's talk about the Brothers of Jesse Gutters. So although there's a snowstorm coming, I don't know if it's going to get all the way out to your side of the state, but it's here in West Michigan. And so there's still snow, but it's got to melt. It's got to go somewhere. So make sure you have properly functioning gutters. The Brothers Jesse Gutters are the ones you want to call and contact about that. You get 10% off as a listener to the show if you just mention Final Four when you get your estimate, which you can get our support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. There you can get a hold of Kurt or Greg, no matter where you are in the state of Michigan, on the east side or the west side, and they can come out and take care of your gutters, whether it's just replacing them, repairing them, cleaning them out, putting gutter guards on, whatever it might be. They can get on the ladder so you don't have to and take care of that. So make sure you have them do it so you stay safe. All right. So the player we listed to keep in the gutter turned out to, I guess you could say, got kept in the gutter. Mackenzie Mabako.
Yeah.
He only played 13 minutes. He's 1 for 4 from the field, 0 for 3 from the line, from three, 5 for 6 from the line, and some of those were big free throws at the end of the game to just make it seal it so Michigan State couldn't win. 7 points, 2 rebounds, no assists, no turnovers, no steals, a block. So I guess they kept him in the gutter, but of course he was not
Yeah.
important, right? The ones who were killing him was Ballo and Renault. Renault
Yep.
finished
Yeah. It
19
was a
points. He was 8 of 19 from the field, 3 for 5 from the line. Balo was 6 of 8 from the field, 14 points, 2 of 3 from the line. And Balo had 10 rebounds. Bruno had 12. I mean, they were, well, there are plenty of options for defensive rebounds, that's for sure, in that game. So anyway, that was, they were the other two possibilities, and they were ones that clearly were more important to keep in the gut of that game.
It was a function of minutes.
Yeah.
That simple. Indiana was able to successfully play with their two big lineups much more than you would have hoped or would have expected, because truthfully, it's been a struggle for them this year.
Well, even when Balo went out and they were no, they were,
Well, that wasn't surprising,
right,
because they've played better with a one big approach. But the fact that they were able to play as much as they did with both of them out there simultaneously was a little bit surprising.
yeah, and they got Michigan State in a lot of foul trouble for Zapala, Kohler, and
Yep,
Cooper. With three guys, you expect that you're going to be able to
yep,
rotate enough out, but they got enough foul trouble that it became an issue, obviously, in the game
yep.
too. All right, so Who Cleans Glass Best brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your windows cleaned, no better people to contact than the Squeegee Squad. They'll come on out to your house and take care of that, whether you're in Grand Rapids or the surrounding area. You get 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. Again, at that our support page. That's Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. They will come out, get the ladders. They'll do the outside. They'll do the interior parts. They'll do the window sills. They'll do the screens. They'll do interior painting if you need to for the next month or so. Also, if you need your house power washed because it's no longer the color that you remember it being painted, they can come out and take care of that as well. And they do a nice, gentle wash as opposed to shooting it from the ground from 80 feet away. They get right up on a ladder. And so I imagine they get really wet doing that. But anyway, they do a gentle wash so they're not having to shoot from so far away. So it's obviously preserves your paint and things like that. So contact the Squeegee Squad. They'll do fantastic work. And they sponsor Who Cleans the Glass Best for Michigan State. So I won this time, 12-8, although it's one of those things I don't really care that I won in a game like that. I had Kohler and Zapala, so I ended with 9. They were 7-2, and then you had Cooper and Carr. Carr had, I think, 1, and Cooper had, I think, 6.
Yeah,
Five and 1. So they had 6 total. So
if Cooper hadn't been foul plagued, I might have had a shot, but
you might have. Yeah.
it
Well,
limited
that's
it,
same
it
with
limited
Kohler,
him.
right? I mean, Kohler
Sure,
was
that's
actually,
it.
and
All
he's
of them.
actually one of the other guys I'd say played pretty well.
Yeah, early,
Yeah,
yes.
I
Early, I'd
guess.
agree with. I did again, when you're facing a zone, one of the inherent weaknesses in a zone, because you don't have a man responsibility, is the ability of the defense to cut out on in terms of their defensive rebounding. Usually, generally speaking, a team that plays a zone is going to give up a lot of offensive rebounds. And Michigan State, I don't know what the percentage is for that game, but it was not, it was great early, and then it just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So I put, Jackson's their best offensive rebounder. I put some of that on him. I did not think Michigan State played with the kind of energy in attacking the ball. It's one thing if you're missing shots, but if you're Michigan State, that's not supposed to be such a big deal, because you're
Yeah.
going to expect you're going to get a lot of second opportunities, and especially against a team playing a zone. And it did not happen. So I can't go with that. There was not a great game by Jacks, in my opinion.
All right. So let's talk about 5 keys to the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. If you want great Spartan apparel, there's no better place than Gabe and Brittany out in Portland, Michigan. They have, obviously, Michigan products. So you can get really great things that are both vintage and sort of modern day images put on your shirts or hoodies, pullovers, whatever it might be. They got all the stuff there. It's a huge selection of things, also other schools as well. So head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. You get 20% off if you mention Final Four. Just type it in as one word at checkout. And you'll be very happy. I've got to actually get something for my wife who wants something now. And I've got my daughter's got a bunch of things. She had a really cool jacket she wore, which it's actually kind of great that she's able to go to the games with us now. And she's right there on campus. We got to go to the pizza house, which is nice, great pizza, and then had a couple ice cream sandwiches. But that was about the end of the highlight of the night.
Yeah.
Once you get midway through the first half. So anyway, head on over to Nudge Printing. You won't be regret it. They do great work and super easy shipping and everything at good prices. So, and I got tons of stuff, and I always talk about it all the time. It's because there's really great stuff, and that's why we love having them as a sponsor of the show. All right. So the first key to the game was the weight. And so this is referring to the weight of the game, the pressure of, I guess, Big Ten race versus also the fact that Izzo's, closing on breaking Bobby Knight's record. I don't know. I didn't feel like that was to me at least didn't feel like that was a part of this problem. It was just like the way Indiana kind of started playing and just they just got kind of the sluggish. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. I think if what would counter anything like that is Michigan State did not come out looking tight.
Right.
They
They
came
came out
out,
looking good. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, 12-point lead early on. Whatever was 20-8
Hmm.
in the first 9 minutes. So no, I don't think so. I don't think that had anything to do with this.
Yeah. That was what a 24-9 run. I think after that, right? It
Yeah,
was, yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
All right. So the second key of the game was transition. This is obviously Michigan State was not able to do this partly because, well, I think Indiana did a pretty good job getting back. Partly because Michigan State, I think, was not pushing as much as they could have. Again, this is, yeah, they had their credit with 19 fast break points, Indiana with 17, so not really an edge you'd expect from Michigan State on that in that respect. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know what you think.
that seems like a generous number.
I mean, usually it's not that high for either
19.
team. Yeah,
No, that's
I
that's actually Michigan State's third in the country, and they average between 17 and 18 a game. So that's a tick above average. And man, it did not feel like that.
let me. Yeah, I mean that's what I have on the. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
got two different sites
it
that
it,
both
it
give
did
19,
not
17.
it did not feel like that. Um, I would say that you're right about the fact that there wasn't a bigger gap was a problem. And I just felt like, as we've talked about, Indiana turned that into exactly what they needed it to be, which frankly, if I'm going to give Woodson credit for anything, it was that. It's that between both ends of the floor, he found a way to turn that into a sluggish, ugly looking game. And that was really the only way Indiana could win. I don't think Indiana could win if it was played in a free flowing way, the way Michigan State would have preferred. Um, they did what they had to do. And again, Michigan State contributed to the effectiveness of a lot of that. But give them credit. Yeah, that number just doesn't jibe with my sense of how that game was played.
Yeah. Anyway, again, that's one of those things you look at like, well, they might be okay. And then
Yeah.
on
No,
the
no, you're
boards,
you're right. I mean, just for a second, if you told me before the game, yeah, they're going to have 19 points in transition, I was like, okay, that's
right,
that's right where they need to be. But it
right.
never felt like that.
Well, even looking at rebounds, they out rebounded Indiana 36-31. They had 12 offensive rebounds. They were at a 35% offensive rebounding rate, which is pretty good. I mean, it's not spectacular, but pretty good. Indiana with 27%. Second chance points, Michigan State had an edge 17-9. So you look at those numbers, you're like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty good. They probably did okay.
Well, that's why it was a 4-point game as opposed to a 14-point game.
Well, that's true. Sure.
I mean, but yeah, you're right. You would look at those numbers and you would say, okay, if you told me that beforehand, I said, yeah, you can live with that. And primarily, I think it's because we don't expect the struggle in every other area,
Yeah.
more or less, to be the way that it was. That they just did not generate any consistent half court offense. Um, those are okay rebounding numbers, but again, I look at it and I think, man, a team playing zone for 75%, 80% of that game, you ought to have done even better.
Yeah,
If
you'd
you're
think.
Michigan State, if you're a top 20 offensive rebounding team in the country, you could aspire to a 40% plus rate against a team playing that way against you. And the fact that they didn't, and by the way, I'd also note, I don't, and obviously I don't think we've got the splits, but I'm going to guess that Michigan State's offensive rebounding, you said they had 12. I'm going to guess they probably had a third of those in the first 9 minutes of the game. They definitely had their first two baskets, I think, both came off offensive putbacks.
They had 5 of their 12 in the second half. So you're
Okay, so there
probably
you
right
go.
partially there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that would mean 7 in the first half, and
Hmm.
I'm going to guess
They had 4 early
four
because
of
I know
those.
the
Right,
first
that's
two
what
were
I'm saying.
misses and then they were putbacks by, I think, Zapala and Kohler.
a
both of them.
third of them came in the first quarter of the game or less.
Yeah.
That kind of tells the story that they got a lot done early. And then when Indiana was able to turn it into a mud people game, a bog man game, that they weren't as effective. And there's just no excuse for it because in terms of what that should be giving you opportunities to do, Michigan State didn't exploit very much of it.
And so the fourth key of the game was turnovers. This is something we thought maybe we thought Michigan State shouldn't turn the ball over too much. And they had 11, which is not terrible.
A lot
Indiana
came in the
had,
second half, though, man.
yeah,
I think eight of them came in the second half.
that's probably true because Indiana, I think, had one or two in the first half. I mean, it was like
Yep.
actually a very clean game. I think Indiana had a turnover, I want to say, with like 7 or 8 minutes left in the first half. And that was the first turnover by either team. It was kind of strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was 11-9. It was a 13-10 edge points off turnovers for Indiana. So again, not something you'd say, oh, that's
Right.
terrible, but critical ones. Where they're getting close, and then Trey
Yep.
just inexplicably throws it away with I don't know with 2 minutes left or something like that. And then Jace
Well,
had that terrible turnover as
big
well
one.
late.
That's the big one.
Yeah,
That's the big one.
when they're down
And
one possession, down
to
2 points, right?
to his credit, he knew it.
Yeah, oh yeah.
He
Well,
said
yeah.
he said so. I could. I'm not the world's greatest lip reader, but I could read this one. There was a segment after that where he came up to Izzo and he said something. It was clear he was acknowledging, apologizing for the mistake, and I could see Izzo saying, "You'll make up for it." Yeah, just kind of a weird, just not locked in. You would say overall, not a terrible effort in that area. But man, when you're trying to come back
Yeah,
and you have eight of them and a half, that's not going to help your effort. And when you're not making up for it by hitting threes, you're not hitting jumpers, you're not getting sufficiently to the offensive glass, it just compounds all of that.
yep, for sure. Yeah, so the fifth key to the game was health, which I mean, there's much to talk about. Michigan State seemed to be at full health, and I mean, maybe you could
Yeah,
say Fears is a little under the weather. Maybe he wasn't totally recovered. Maybe been
maybe,
a little net on game shape. That's possible, but I
maybe.
would think it probably didn't affect things that much. Just kind of go some other thing. It's interesting looking at free throws. Michigan State had 25 free throw attempts, hit 21 of them, so fantastic. Free throw
Yeah.
rate. Obviously, Indiana with 28, they're 20-28 for the game. But they definitely had more free throws through most of that game, even towards the end. The style that they were playing was different than Michigan State's, obviously. And
Yeah, well,
the State had a lot of free throws early, and then they sort of, I think they were 7-7, and then they maybe had two more the rest of the first half, and they definitely got away sort
correct.
of with what they were doing.
Correct. The two that they had after that were the two that Carson Cooper missed. Well, that will happen when you are not attacking,
Yeah.
when you are not getting the ball into the gaps and putting pressure on their defense at the rim. It's that simple. And so again, I come back to that. For me, that was the issue that dwarfed all the rest put together, is the way they did not attack that zone. Was what most of the other problems flowed from.
Yeah.
It's like I saw somebody respond to a tweet I made last night talking about alluding to Carson Cooper one-on-one defense being a part of the problem. And I said, man, if you think that was anywhere near the top of the list of what was significant in that game, you don't know what you're watching.
Yeah.
Carson Cooper was one of the few guys that showed up.
Yeah. I thought so.
And by the way, when he's isolated one-on-one, when any center is isolated one-on-one in the low post
Oh, yeah,
with a
you're
kid like
doomed. You're
Ballo,
doomed.
you're going to give up some points.
Yeah.
But, what was Ballo had 8 shot attempts, you said?
He's 6 for 8. Yeah. 14.
Yeah, okay. So efficient, but not like crazy shot attempts. And Renault was well under 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So those guys, for however it felt to you watching it, you have to take that into account. Say, well, yeah, they got reasonable production there, but if we're executing anywhere near a semi acceptable level, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it
Well,
mattered because Michigan State didn't execute at all offensively.
yeah. Well, and then, the other interesting thing is Indiana was 0 for 3 from three in the second half, but the key was three. So they only took three,
Right.
made three attempts.
Yeah.
They hit 3 of 13 for 23% miserable. And Michigan State was 4 of 23. So they took 10 more shots to hit one more, to finish at 17.4%. I mean, obviously that was, and those were not all bad looks. So I don't know.
But here's the thing, and this gets to the crux of it. I agree that in terms of was it an open shot, you can say vast majority of them were open shots. So quote unquote good looks. But here's the problem with that. The analysis can't just be that. It has to be, why is that shot being taken in the first place? Well,
Hmm.
in part, it's being taken because they're not creating better shots for this team. And for this team, it's pretty clear they want to play inside the arc. So if you are taking 25 threes,
Yeah.
I would submit that alone is evidence of an issue offensively because that cannot be the design for this team.
Yeah. Well, the, I only hope that the problems are, well, I don't know. I guess going forward, we'll have to talk about when we talk about the Illinois game, but it's discouraging because it just looked like a team that just kind of got sucked into a game they didn't want to play. Not that didn't want to be at the court, but just that they played a style of game that they didn't want to, and they just kind of got suckered into it in some respects.
It's
Um,
absolutely. It was when I talk about not playing with the pace needed, not playing with energy, a lot of times frequently, that's the physical manifestation of what the real problem is, which is mental,
mhm.
which is you're not feeling confident. Typically, when you slow down the way Michigan State did, it can be a result of being of a lack of confidence, being uncertain, not playing with an assertive nature, assertive mindset. And I do think that's what happened. I think they let themselves. That's why I say I can't give Indiana too much credit because that was not the second coming of Judd Heathcote's matchup zone in 1979 out there. That was
Yeah.
a half-ass, it was a half-ass 2-3 that he just slapped out there and said, okay, we'll make these guys prove it. And Michigan State proved that they couldn't attack it well enough. It
Yeah.
wasn't a great defense, it was poor offense. And that was, it was a mental thing as much as anything else, in my opinion. And that the mentality has got to shift. It'll be interesting to see. Um, I don't think it's possible we'll see some zone from Illinois, but they don't play a lot of that. Purdue, I'd be shocked. That's just not Matt Painter's thing.
Hmm.
We might see occasional possessions of it, but these next two games, I don't know how much they'll be challenged with that. It may happen. Those coaches may look at this and say, "Hey, we got to try it. Make them prove that they can attack it." But
Yeah.
um, some of the other games, Michigan, they've shown more of a
Certainly
propensity to
Iowa.
play zone. Iowa for sure. Yeah. Um, so we'll see. I don't necessarily expect that it's something that we're going to see a steady diet of. Um, but who knows?
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll we'll stop. We'll end it there. And again, thanks again so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share with your friends. So until next time, hopefully better times. The Final Four is not the schedule. Go green.